And for more on Russia's Victory Day parade, both in Moscow, we have Pavel Falkenhauer, Russian defense analyst, and also Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst, originally coming from the United States, now in Russia. In Boston, U.S., we are joined by Jim Walsh, senior research associate at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. So every year there is a parade. 72nd this year, Mr. Falkenhauer, what is the message?
Well, the message is loud and clear. The Russian top brass say that, and they say that not only through this parade, that threat of war is growing, that tensions with the West are growing. It's almost a Cold War, and Russia should be ready, and Russia should spend more. And that's a message not only to the world, that's a message for the Russian people and the Russian leadership, because they want more. They want more money for their rearmament program.
I see. Mr. Sleboda, it's a message for the world and also for the public. We need more money. Is that the message you also got?
No, that's not really the message I got. First and foremost, this is about history, tradition, and mourning the sacrifice of the tens of millions of Russian and Allied dead in World War II. Only second can this be interpreted as a political force. And even then, the image you get from watching the parade, and I believe the message sent both by the parade, the Immortal Regiment March of people watching with the icons of their deceased ancestors, is one of endurance. Russia is willing to endure any sacrifice, any amount of tragedy, and in the end will overcome. But this is primarily a defensive.
I see.
So if anything, the president, the message of the Russian president today was one of he's willing to work with anyone, but Russia is more than capable of defending itself from anything.
I see. From your perspective, how much do you think you see the latest development of armament through this parade?
Yeah, I take what both my colleagues said. I don't think their answers were incompatible. I think you could combine them. My takeaway is, what are parades? Parades are acts of symbolism. It's about prestige, and that's really a metaphor for Russian foreign policy. Yes, we saw some new armaments displayed, particularly with respect to air defense and some technologies that might be used in the Arctic region, but I don't think we should underestimate the structural challenges Russia faces as it attempts to make up for 20 years of lagging behind. Your introductory report gave the figure for Russian military expenditures. Well, the U.S. spends 5 times that amount. And the Russians have a lot of catching up to do. And again, the lesson of the fall of the Soviet Union was, if you're going to be a global power, you have to have an economy that sustains that. And right now, I don't think, with the demographic problems and dependence on oil prices, that Russia's really in a position to reclaim that.
We have to ask our two guests right now based in Russia, Mr. Falkenhauer and Mr. Sleboda, what do you think? Is this show of force and strength, muscles, likely to convince the public in Russia and the rest of the world about a upswing for Russia and, of course, for President Putin? Mr. Falkenhauer.
Well, I believe that the most important viewer of this parade was President Vladimir Putin. The Russian military was showing him what the money that he gave was spent on. It's very important for the kind of departmental game going on in Moscow on the future defense spending. And that they can use the money, if they're given more, to produce more wonderful weapons. And of course, they also are constantly, not in this parade, but in general, trumping the threat of imminent attack coming from the West and from NATO.
Okay, Mr. Sleboda, help me to understand from your perspective. You got Russia-U.S. relations now very uncertain. The foreign ministers and the Secretary of State likely to meet tomorrow with one another. Also, you have got the investigation going on in Washington against the President Trump of his administration's link to Russia during the election. Meanwhile, Russia's role in the Middle East on Syria issue and also Crimea issue right in his neighborhood, not yet clear, seems to be obstacles still for Russia to be with so-called sitting down with the Western countries. What do you think this means for President Putin this going to be, the parade, a big boost for his confidence and that of the country?
Yeah, of course, there is a measure of presenting to the Russian people the security and order accomplishments of his administration and their efforts towards modernizing the Russian military. It's certainly still not on a par with the U.S. military, which is the most expensive and used military in the world. Experience matters, and the U.S. has certainly used their military above and beyond the call of duty around the world in recent decades. But I think that Russia's successes in Syria have impressed even the U.S. military brass. Its fight for counterterrorism against various jihadist and Islamist elements in Syria, of course, many of them supported in the back door by the West and its Gulf dictatorship allies. Russia has helped the Syrian government withstand a regime change from the West, and that is not a minor feat. And this parade, if anything, only reinforces that fact. I think that is about the extent of Russia's ability to project power beyond its borders, but it has certainly created a military much more formidable within its and near abroad, certainly than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
That's right. There were some earlier reports that the snow has been, in a way, preventing some of the greatest air shows from reality. Yet, Mr. Walsh, that also leads us to the next question, which is, how much space Russia now can really extend its muscle given the realities these days? And President Putin, for the upcoming election a year or two from now, how much he can convince his public that he has achieved what he promised during the last campaign?
Well, let me take both questions. Let me take the second first. For an upcoming election campaign, Mr. Putin enjoys massive advantages. He controls the state media, and he can jail or even occasionally kill opposition figures. So any election, there are never surprises in Russian elections. Let me put it that way. So I think he's probably, and he probably will run again. I'm sure he'll be elected.
Mr. Sloboda certainly does not agree with what you just said. But very briefly, your conclusion is, Mr. Walsh?
I'm just not very into conspiracy theories.
Yes. Mr. Sloboda, very briefly
okay,
from you,
fine.
and then I go to Mr. Walsh. We only have 1 minute left. Mr. Sloboda, one sentence or two, then Mr. Walsh.
Yeah, I just think it's not constructive when talking about this to engage in conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Whether they be about Clinton's assassinating its political opponents or in Russia.
All right. Okay. Mr. Walsh, final words.
Yeah, Russia's problem, you can see it on a map. It's really, really big. It somehow has to defend itself on its European front. The future of the globe is in Asia. It has very little going on in Asia. It is the major player in the Arctic. That's a lot of different places to be involved, and not to mention a little bit of the Middle East when you have limited resources and a smallish economy.
We are really running out of time, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for your understanding. And Pavel Felgenhauer, Mark Sloboda, Jim Walsh, I'm sure we're going to have you back for another discussion about the latest with Russia.